wait for the video to go live for people who can watch with us too, who aren't in person. And hi, Barbara. If it sounds okay. Up to you. Well, welcome everyone. I'm glad you guys are here with us for a special evening at Temple Shir Shalom. We, I think, put this day in the calendar back in August. I pitched the idea to Rabbi Mike Moskowitz when we were in Jerusalem together in July, and I'm really lucky that he's also friends with Rabbi Aaron Starr. And so because of that, there's a lot of people to thank to make this evening possible. So he's been the scholar in residence in our community now for the past, since Thursday night. So he spent Shabbat with Sharet Zedek and was with them on Friday and Saturday. Sunday he woke up and had to report to me and was with our parents in religious school on Sunday morning. Then he went to Ann Arbor and was at U of M Hillel and with their Ahava, their queer affinity group. Then was with us and our high school kids here at Temple with Sisti, which was great, and then watched the Lions game. So he tried to help us, but we still had a nice evening together, so that was good. Then today he's been going strong. I started teaching a class on Zoom at 9, and then at 10 was with the Michigan Board of Rabbis. 22 of my colleagues sat with us together and studied with him. Then back here at Temple at noon, a tech study here. Then went over to JFS and met with their staff and talked about the work he does and fielded their questions. And he had a few minutes to quickly eat something, and now appear here. So we'll see if he stays awake the whole time in his conversation. I want to thank Sharet Zedek with Shir Shalom for making this possible. Federation of Metropolitan Detroit, who helped make it possible for Thursday night, a special evening we were able to do together. The Hartman Institute, the Shalom Hartman Institute, which has helped publicize this too and make this a reality as well. We're really blessed to have so many in our community who want to partner together. And you know, Rabbi Moskowitz is the scholar in residence at Congregation Beit Simchat Torah in New York City. It's the largest LGBTQ synagogue in the world, a little over 50 years old, and is a scholar in residence of trans and queer studies. And you can ask in a moment about what that means, but has worked in the synagogue and in a synagogue role as a pulpit rabbi in an Orthodox synagogue in New York, at Columbia University as an Aish Torah rabbi, a lot of different things in his life that's brought him to this time. But most importantly, for our purposes tonight, his name is Rabbi Mike Moskowitz. And that really is what brings us together. Because, right, I mean, if you got a name like that, then you know he's going to talk really quickly, he's going to like whiskey, and he's going to be really funny, right? Right? Come on. Absolutely. He can hold his own. We've really enjoyed our time together, actually. And although, like I said, we were together this summer for a few hours, and then I brought him over to meet with the Tamarack seniors in high school at our hotel, and he wowed me then in his ability to communicate, teach, and bring things relevant to people on their level and their understanding. And so my fun story that I've shared with some of you is, you know, how I first learned of Rabbi Moskowitz, I think about 6 years ago, when he wrote this great essay in support of the LGBT community. And my daughter Ellie's friends said to her, "Oh my God, your dad's essay is so good. So spot on. He hit it on the head, so good." And then Ellie said to me, "Dad, my friends love your essay. I read it. It's so good. B'Tselem Elohim in the image of God. Awesome. Strong work, Dad." I'm like, "Ellie, just scroll far enough down and see the picture." That was the first time. A number of other things have occurred where The Guardian in London, England called me to interview me, and I asked them why they wanted to interview me. And so I said, wrong Mike Moskowitz, equally as intelligent and well-versed, but nonetheless. And so finally, you know, early in the pandemic when I had a little time and we're more and more on Zoom, I reached out to him and we started talking. And then had the opportunity to do some teaching here at Shir Shalom on Zoom for our community. And I loved hearing what he had to teach and share. And I'll tell you, This is our 6th time sitting next to each other in the past, 36 hours. And every time we're together, I learn something new from him. Even though some of the settings have been similar to what we're doing now, some have been different. I'm always finding new things that he's sharing, new verses, new ideas, new ways of looking at things, and I really appreciate his perspectives. I think you all will as well. So I'm going to sort of share a little with him and interview him and get him to share with all of you, and then at the end we'll open it up to your questions. So you can, if you have specific things you want to talk about that we didn't get to address. So the first thing, being an ultra-Orthodox rabbi, how did you get into this kind of work, which is not usually what we're seeing in an ultra-Orthodox rabbi? As you said, before you were studying 18 hours a day and your life was a little bit different.
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for honoring and sanctifying my name with the way in which you move about the world. If I have to share my name with somebody, I'm really honored that it's you.
Thank you.
And this community has just been so welcoming, and I'm just honored to be here, so thank you so much. Borrowing language from the queer community, I was assigned secular at birth and then came out as Orthodox in high school. I joke that those who knew me when I was a kid, they tell me they always knew. But I think really the openness of recognizing that there was an expectation for me to present in a particular way that didn't feel aligned with who I felt essentially I was, made it really easy to understand that religious identity is not the only track on that journey of recognizing that we're sometimes put into places that are good fits for us and they're supportive of our contributions in the world. And sometimes that's short-lived, and sometimes it's never a good fit, but part of actualizing our potential, our unique potential, is recognizing that we have to sometimes make it happen for ourselves. And so when I was 17 years old, I became observant, went on a right-wing trajectory, in part because I saw this world being really broken and didn't have a framing to understand why. When I was a kid, I witnessed a lot of heartbreak and sadness, and people got sick and died, and people were in car accidents. And as a kid, I just thought, this is a bad model of existence. This world doesn't make sense that so many people are suffering. And when I was in high school and was exposed to new ideas, particularly from our tradition, it became clear to me that the world that God created was not this broken world. It was a perfect world. It was literally the Garden of Eden, where there were no issues. Everything was taken care of. And then God said, no, we didn't listen. And we broke this world, and so it's on us to fix it. And so for me, going to yeshiva at 17 was really the beginning of my journey of social justice, that the idea of being pious, like a chassid, the root there is the word chesed, kindness. The idea of being a tzaddik, somebody who's righteous, the root there is tzedek, justice. That really it's about the deep dive and understanding how are things broken and how do we fix the world. Tikkun olam isn't just you'll translate my accent sometimes, tikkun olam.
We had to stop high school last night at one point because he kept saying Torah as he pronounces Torah, and I had to tell him, that's Torah, kids. That's what we know as Torah. It's okay. You pronounce it your way. If I need to, I'll translate.
No, it's all about diversity, I think. But really, I went to yeshiva to try to study how to fix this world. And 20 years later, when I was a rabbi at Columbia University and the rabbi of the Old Broadway Synagogue, which is the closest Orthodox synagogue to Columbia, somebody in my family came out as trans and said to me, I'm not a girl, I'm a boy. And I asked him, how do you know? I know how I'm a guy and it's not the same way. And I thought about it obsessively. I reached out to the gender studies folks. I reached out to Keshet in Boston. And I really couldn't gain any sort of traction in trying to understand it anymore. And I got to what I think is a relatively evolved space of just knowing that I don't know. Being cisgender, somebody who kind of identifies with the gender that they were assigned at birth, is for me a limited awareness of gender identity. And for trans and genderqueer folks, it's a more expansive sensitivity. But that sensation of there's something wrong with the world, that people are suffering, that people don't have a place to be who they are, that they're scared, they're hiding out in the shadows, they feel like there isn't a place for them, was something that felt very alive, and it was new in this manifestation, but not new in that this world is broken. And for me, I think faith has always been the catalyst for action. Judaism is a religion of action. It's not just enough to love peace, we have to pursue it. But I think to the extent that we have faith that if we do the right thing, we're going to end up in the right spot, so then we can take on the precarity and not have to worry about the consequences of what might happen by doing the right thing, because we believe if we do the right thing, it can't be bad. And so at 37, I made the choice to really start speaking publicly about these issues. It felt like there was an opportunity to perhaps move the needle a little bit from within the platform of privilege of having my own synagogue, which became the first synagogue for out trans folks to really find gender affirmation in segregated spaces of gender. And many Orthodox synagogues, there's a mechitza, partition that separates genders, at least two genders. Sometimes there's a trichitza for a third section. And while some people might find that offensive, for many trans folks, it's really affirming that even the space where they sit validates their gender identity, that they can come into a room and be seen by the room as who they are. And it became a delicate balance to try to be as out as possible as an ally without tipping the boat and losing the privilege. And so I was writing for about a year under a pseudonym. I was writing for Keshet and other places. One of the letters that I wrote to a school in Memphis, Tennessee, a Jewish day school that was threatening to throw out a trans student, got leaked and shared tens of thousands of times. And my employers said I had to either stop or we couldn't continue. I didn't stop. We didn't continue. And then that really became kind of the beginning of the next chapter, which was trying to figure out how to do this work from like the outside space of the world, trying to simultaneously be still a source of influence to the Orthodox and the ultra-Orthodox world, while also trying to bridge the gap of the wisdom of our tradition and often esoteric sources to the needs of the much broader Jewish world.
Rabbi Schwartz, of blessed memory, would always say, God closes the door, opens a window, right? It had to be difficult when you were fired, when you lost that job at Columbia, and humbling as well, and that experience. But somehow you landed on your feet in between working at a deli as well, which wasn't the worst job you ever held. So I've been with him a long time now. So will you talk about that journey and what happened and how you landed at Beit Simchat Torah and the work you're doing there then?
It's, I really believe that no blade of grass blows in the wind without divine providence. And when I got fired, it was in the winter. It was after a speech that I'd given on Hanukkah, really acknowledging that we, each one of us, are a unique light. The verse says, Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, that God's candle is our soul. So we have to ask ourselves, where in the darkness do we want to stand? Where do we want to be a light? Is it going to be in the closet or in like-minded places in the shadows? Or is it going to be like the Menorah al Pesach Beisim Mebechutz at the entrance facing the outside world as a way of changing the darkness and really replacing it with light? And after I got fired, I didn't have a place to go. It was pretty public. There was a lot written about it, and it was covered in the news. And I couldn't find a job. I have 3 ultra-Orthodox ordinations. I learned in the largest yeshivas in the world for a long time. And everybody was nervous because of what I did, and they weren't interested in bringing that perspective into their spaces. And so I did. I took a job at a deli, which was not the worst job I ever had. I actually enjoyed it very much, but it did feel like I wasn't put in this world to just do that. And one day in the winter, I took, about a year and a half later, it was a decent amount of time there, I took a day off to be part of an act of civil disobedience over DACA in the Senate Rotunda in DC for immigration. I and about 80 other rabbis got arrested. In the back of the police wagon, they separated us by gender. There was 5 male-identified rabbis. There was a metal partition, a mechitza, and 5 female-identified rabbis. And one of the women said, we're a bunch of rabbis. Does anybody have any Torah to share? She said to a rabbi, but I knew what she meant. And, it's a captive audience. We're all in handcuffs, which, as rabbis go, is like the best place possible to find yourself if you're going to give a sermon.
I'm providing handcuffs during high holiday services from now on. Longest sermon ever. Sorry.
No, it's so good. And I had just written an article on gender and clothing, and so I shared some thoughts, I volunteered. And through the next 5 hours of being processed and going through the ordeal, I got to know a little bit more about this rabbi. She got to know a little bit more about me. That rabbi was Rabbi Sharon Kleinbaum, who is the senior rabbi at Congregation Beit Simchat Torah, the world's largest LGBT synagogue. She's retiring this year after 32 years. But she and some generous folks at CBST created a position for me. And so I've been there. This is my 6th year. I've published hundreds of articles, and my 5th book, God willing, is coming out this year. And it's been incredible to see how quickly the change is happening. CBST this year celebrated its 50th year. It started in 1973. In 1973, there was not a single rabbi, Jewish leader, or Jewish institution that said it was okay to be gay in this country. And people asked, like, how can you have a gay synagogue? And now 50 years later, people are asking, like, why is it even necessary, right? You have queer rabbis in all the denominations now. And it's been incredible to see the edges within Orthodoxy really shift. My work is around, in the Orthodox and the ultra-Orthodox world, is really LGBT plus issues, and then in interfaith and interdenominational spaces, it's around conversion therapy, banning it, and also trans and genderqueer issues that affect the trans community.
So how do you spend your days as a rabbi, as a scholar in residence? I mean, some of the things you share, it sounds like you're more like a therapist in a sense and a guide for individuals. So
there's a lot of counseling. It's almost none of it is ongoing. People call, they're looking for perspective, they're looking for permission, they're looking for ideas and framings. I tried to share them and then share some articles for more details and sources. And then I tell them if there's something else I could do to be helpful, like reach out. So it really first started with helping individuals process their own queerness and internalized homophobia, to helping them come out to their parents, to helping parents have conversations with their rabbis in their community, helping rabbis have conversations with their communities, particularly when members have children who are marrying each other of the same gender in their community, and really coming up with a framing that helps lead parents and others along the journey, which is kind of inevitable. The standard structure of parents that come in with their daughter coming out to them as a lesbian after seminary, I ask them, like, is she still Sabbath observant? Is she still Orthodox? And they'll say yes. And then I'll say, like, okay, so you have a choice. You can either have a lesbian daughter that's Shomer Shabbos or a lesbian daughter that's not Shomer Shabbos, right? But one of those is a choice. And if you force the person to choose, you're going to be left with she's still going to be a lesbian, because that part's not a choice. And so a lot of it is helping them or trying to convince them that they're not being punished by God, they didn't mess up as parents, but really they've been chosen generally as really sensitive and good people, if they choose to be supportive, that they have a unique opportunity of really healing the inherited trauma of religion, that now young people don't have to choose between a religious identity and a queer identity. And so that's really a big part of the day, is answering people's questions. And not just answering people's questions, but really answering the people who are asking the questions, because people need to hear different things. And so a big chunk of the day is really in trying, ideally in real time, answering emails and questions and calls. The default is that I write. That's kind of what fills a lot of the day. And then it's a lot of coalition building. It's a lot of strategic planning for systemic change. How do we create inflection points in certain places that are close and really want to do it, but they're not independently motivated, or they're not going to take the initiative to do it? And so what can we do to bring attention to the fact that they're virtue signaling, that like they're progressive, they want to do this, but they're really falling short in the practical application of it. So, and there are also the rabbis who reach out all day, particularly at intersections of gender-based spiritual practice, conversions and circumcision. Is circumcision, for example, a gender-based spiritual practice that men need to be circumcised, or is it body part specific that a person can't be uncircumcised? So let's say you have somebody who was assigned male at birth, they transition, she now wants to convert to Judaism, she hasn't had bottom surgery. So if it's a male rite of passage, so this is a woman, she doesn't need to go through it. But if it's a function of not being circumcised and has nothing to do with gender, so then she would need to go through that process. And this is something that we're seeing parallel in American conversations around women's reproductive rights is now reproductive rights. Not every woman has a uterus, not everyone with a uterus is a woman. Feminine hygiene is just hygiene. And so as we get a better grasp on the reality, the language can become more precise. And a big part of this job is actually coming up with new language, right, to describe these things.
Every time we sit together, like I said, I'm learning, and different questions come up as far as the things that we have to wrestle with as a people, as Jews. For me, as a Reform rabbi, as a liberal rabbi, as some of you know, and as we've talked about, I did a wedding for 2 women in 1996. And although it wasn't happening regularly, and there were protests and letters to the editor in the Jewish News against us for doing that, we were very confident in that we were doing the right thing, and it was what we wanted to do, and done a lot since then. But I'm not ultra-Orthodox. And so how are you able to do that? And, people look at Jewish law and say, well, it says in Leviticus that a man cannot lie with a man as he will with a woman. That's what God said. And also the other thing you and I have discussed, you see Torah as min hashamayim, as is infallible from God to Moses to the people of Israel, where I see it as something human created, divinely inspired. Gives me a little more liberty in a sense as well. How do you make sense of that in your life?
For me, a consequence of the theology that the Torah speaks to every single generation and is sourced back on Mount Sinai is that I believe that God answered the questions that we're wrestling with today about genderqueer folks and where they should sit, or how should we support people who have gender fluidity and gender-based spiritual practice at Mount Sinai. And so for me, the enterprise is less about inventing or creating and more about aspiring to uncover and discover what was said there. We've shared some of the sources in some of the other classes that it's interesting, the verse that you quote in Leviticus involves 3 people. A man can't be with another man the way he is with a woman. The way the Talmud frames it, according to Rashi and the other medieval commentators, is that woman is actually his wife. And it's really a function of promiscuity and infidelity. And in the Code of Jewish Law, it's framed similarly about women. It says in Even Ezer that husbands should warn their wives not to be with other women, which is a really strange framing if you're just trying to say 2 dudes can't be together, 2 women can't be together. And it's really consistent in those spaces that a person might think that I'm not being unfaithful if I'm being with somebody of the same gender because I'm not cheating on my partner with somebody else of the same gender. And I think what the Torah and what the rabbis are saying is that no, it's actually very real. And part of the communal responsibility and the natural consequence of erasing the queer experience is that the homophobia contributes to the most literal interpretation of the verse by forcing queer people to marry in heteronormative mixed orientation weddings. And so really what I see the call of the verse today meaning is if you don't want people to be sneaking around and being dishonest and misrepresenting who they are in relationships, you have to acknowledge that not everybody's attracted to people of the opposite gender. And it's really been exciting with all of the pain and suffering that has happened for so many people that have struggled. They have now really made it possible for particularly young people to have models of Orthodox same-sex couples, and I've been privileged to officiate at a decent number of them already. And each one continues to advance the cause, and the structure and the practice of trying to be more inclusive of the spectrum of needs and identities within these marriages continues to expand in ways which is really encouraging.
It's remarkable how far we've come. And for both of our, look, when I was ordained as a rabbi, when I entered rabbinical school was the year that Hebrew Union College and the Reform movement said we will openly ordain gay and lesbian rabbis in 1990. Right? Before that, and even in school though, I had professors who said, I will not sign your smicha if you come out. Right? And so I had classmates some who said, I don't care, and they came out. And so there are one of my favorite professors, his name is not on their smicha. Right? And I'm sort of angry at myself for not arguing and fighting on their behalf and being a better ally. I didn't understand what it meant to be an ally and use that word back then. Part of our time together today is about how we can be better allies. Right? A lot of us in this room is made up of straight people, gay people, trans people, but for us, here are 2 straight rabbis, in monogamous heterosexual relationships with our wives, but how can we be, as a community, as individuals, better allies?
Allyship is hard. It's often awkward. I'm the scholar in residence for trans and queer Jewish studies, and I'm not trans and I'm not queer. But it's kind of par for the course. It's often as elusive as it is aspirational. It's so person-specific that what can be really affirming and validating to one can be offensive and even traumatic to another. So there's no substitute for proximity and relationship building and deep listening, humble listening, where as straight people who are men and white and are used to people listening to us, right? It's actually a real kind of lift to say, I have no idea what I'm talking about. I need to learn something from you, right? And that's not something that comes naturally. I would say historically for me, that's something that doesn't come naturally. But it is a humbling experience when people ask you questions about this and you're like, I've never thought about it ever in my life. I have no idea. So really there's no substitute for listening. And in order to listen, you have to have somebody to talk to. And so there's really also no substitute for really putting out there the intentionality of, we want to get this right. We want to advance the cause. We want to make sure that this is a sanctuary. It's literally the safe space to be the most authentic and genuine version of oneself in relationship to each other, community, and to the divine. So part of it is really, I think, making sure that you have the diversity that exists in the world in your own private life. If you don't know anybody who's queer, you probably haven't outed yourself as somebody who's an ally because there are probably queer folks in your orbit who haven't told you. If you don't know somebody who's trans or genderqueer, it's probably a similar situation. So there are wonderful books to read, particularly from queer and genderqueer authors. There's wonderful resources and other ways of trying to understand what it means. But it's a learning curve. There's space between being in opposition and really being adept at being supportive. I remember early on where I was like all gung-ho about all the things. It was actually at JTS, which was right next to the old Broadway synagogue. I come into the study hall there, the Beis Medrash. There's a woman, and there's like a Mazel Tov balloon. So I said, oh, what's the simcha? What's the Mazel Tov? And she said, oh, I just got engaged. I said, oh, fantastic. Where is he from? What's his name? And so she said, no, she. And I was like, oh, my bad, right? Like, I wasn't trying to be obnoxious. I wasn't trying to erase, right? And I wasn't trying to assume heteronormativity. But if that's the default for decades, and so a lot of this is actually, when we say ladies and gentlemen, or, sons and daughters, like, are we acknowledging that maybe there's something between that binary? What do we do in terms of switching language, particularly for institutions here, bathrooms, and it's something that we've spoken about. To be an ally means to advocate for accessibility, and so there needs to be safe bathroom access for genderqueer and trans folks, and there needs to be safe bathroom access for people who use wheelchairs, and then you need to have bathroom access that's safe for genderqueer people who use, right? And so, generally speaking, when we think about accessibility, we're often responding and reacting like, oh, there's somebody who's using a wheelchair and there's only steps, right, and there's no ramp. And then we try to figure out how do we respond. And in general, allyship colloquially is trying to react to a breakdown in society. If there's voter suppression, we respond by trying to make sure that people can get to the polls, and so we'll schlep them. But that doesn't actually fix or repair anything. And I think one of the major contributions that Judaism offers to the conversation of allyship is that it's meant to be restorative, right? The invitation is to imagine what's the ideal way of being, where I'm not coming to help shoulder the burden of oppression, I'm coming to remove it entirely. And so the only way to know how to direct the efforts towards removing the oppression is to know who's oppressed and how. And that's something that we can't really intuit, particularly around the intersections of race and other things that have become big issues. If you don't have anybody in your life that's in those spaces, it's really unlikely that you're going to access that first-person narrative and of the lived experience of others.
I like what you said in another conversation we had about the Hebrew word for ally is chaver, which is also the word for friend, right? But the root of the word chaver comes from to bind, to connect, right? And the idea of our connections that we feel. And also, can you share the idea of proximity and what that
Sure.
means, and as opposed to sometimes what we see as far as racist things that occur and the differences there in our world?
Yeah, my favorite proof text is in the story of Joseph and his brothers. The verse testifies that they saw him from afar and sought to kill him. That from a distance, it's much easier to dehumanize. And so really the idea of coming close, to be so close that we can love another person like we love ourselves, is the ultimate goal, right? The Torah says, "V'ahavta l'recha kamecha," that we're supposed to be so connected to each other that there just is not another, right? There's no other. The most pronounced identity of any human being is being created in the image of the divine. And so there's actually something that's not just dehumanizing, but it's something that's sacrilegious, right? It takes away the holiness of a human by making them less holy, by making them less human. So the idea of being a chaver is also, being an ally, is also connected to the consequence, which is the chorban. In my tradition, the Hebrew alphabet are the building blocks of creation. And so the roots and the letters of the words really represent the essence of the thing. So I'm sure everyone's familiar with the term of a chabura, like a chavrusa, a chabura. It's a collective. It's just the plural of chaver. The same letters form the word cherev, which is sword, and it's also the word for destruction, chorban. That destruction is the natural consequence of the lack of a cohesive society. You see this also in places of violence against women in the Hebrew Bible. There are two words for desire. There's the word cheshek and there's the word chafetz. By Dinah and Shechem, where she's assaulted, it says they desired her as a chafetz. By the Isha Yifastar, by the woman of beautiful appearance in the war. And also in the story of Esther, the same word is deployed 3 times. The word chafetz, in addition to meaning desire, is also the word for object. Like in modern Hebrew, a chafetz chashud is a suspicious package. So the violence comes when a person is the object of desire and they are objectified. That act of taking away the human to create an object is consistent and can be in really macro ways and can be in micro ways, right? They're microaggressions that we erase people's identities and don't validate their existences. And so by being an ally, it's being sensitive to when that happens and trying to counter it through both micro affections, by trying to remove some of the small weight that accumulates through the day through these microaggressions, and also in really macro ways of changing the world.
You know, you talk about aggressions, microaggressions, and the challenges that you may feel as well. You know, I already referenced the fact that you were fired from one job because of the stance you took. And we know that you're not a majority opinion in the ultra-Orthodox community as opposed to me in the Reform movement, who has lots of support. But even me, there are members of Temple who have challenged that, why are we doing this? This is not what we should teach. You know, is it eroding the natural family and things like that? But you probably get a lot more of that. And how do you get through that? Because it's probably a lonely island you're sitting on at times.
Yeah, it's lonely. It's below ground in a chapel that doesn't have windows or clocks. So sometimes I wish it was an island, because it's it's like a casino down there. You don't even know what time it is. It's which is fine because it feels like that's where it works. It manifests how I feel. It's hard. It's really hard. I have a lot of faith. I've never struggled in those spaces. I feel really blessed that I have clarity of what my contribution is. And so, yeah, it's lonely, but I always felt like King David writes in Psalm 23, even in the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, ki ata imadi, because you're with me. And so if a person feels like they're traveling and journeying with the divine, you're in good company. And so, like, I feel really lucky that I feel the divine presence. I feel like I'm being held and supported by partnering with the divine as an ally to the divine, as a person who's trying to manifest the divine will of healing the brokenness. And in that way, like, it's lonely in that I don't have so many friends. And it's an awkward conversation when you're the only one who's, talking. But I do feel that the reward, and we've experienced it together, where people have said, like, this means the world to me. I had one, when I was a rabbi at Columbia, there was one young man, he left the West Coast after high school. His family was not supportive. The family was also secular. At the airport, he was assigned female and secular at birth. At the airport, he cut his long hair, bought new clothes, packed a yarmulke and tzitzis, and landed on the East Coast as both male and Orthodox. And he carried around a tremendous amount of anxiety because he passed and he was stealthy. He didn't want that anyone should know either of those identities. And he was a student, a congregant. And when I started talking about these issues, he came up to me and he's like, you know that I'm trans? And I said, no, how would I know? I don't think about these things. And he opened up about like how much weight he was really carrying. When he would go to the Orthodox minyan, he would make sure that he wasn't the 10th man. So he would like constantly run to the bathroom and try to make sure that he wasn't putting himself in a position where he had to own his masculinity in a Jewish way that maybe other people would have different definitions. And he just felt like he didn't want to be dishonest, but he couldn't also deny who he was. And he was like putting himself in a really painful pretzel. And during finals that year, I received a text from him where he said, Rabbi, I just think it's too much. I just don't know how much, I can continue. And before I could respond, he said in a text, I just so appreciate your existence. And it became a really important moment for me where I felt like if he just knows that I exist and that like helps him a little bit, so then how can I justify not being more public so that other people should know that they're not alone in this and that there are people who believe in them, there are people who believe them. And I asked him, like, what's the message that you want me to give to the world? What can I do to amplify your voice? And he said, I want people to know that nobody's life is ever hypothetical. And it's something that I try to say wherever I go, because particularly as rabbis, we do a really good job of talking about things and experiences of people as if people are things. And the questions of the Talmud and the scenarios there don't involve people with pulses or faces or the urgency or the feelings that they have. And so I think there's something deeply humanizing in recognizing that we talk about this from a place not of curiosity in the world of ideas, but in a very real way that there are people who are suffering because we have not been yet able to bring these ideas to the world to allow them to really change the world and support them.
You taught me that last night in a conversation that we were privileged to be a part of together, and reminded me, I'd say, of that too. When a young woman after our high school conversation came up to us and thanked you and us together, and a 16-year-old girl, and said, I'm a lesbian, and I really appreciate and honor this conversation and what you're doing here for us. And you said, the work I'm doing is really hard, but hearing you say that makes it all worthwhile.
Yeah.
So it was very reciprocal and beautiful, and also like reminding me, like, this is why we have a synagogue, this is why we have a community, this is why we have a safe space, and so that all of our kids feel that way too. And so it was really validating in that way, but I love how you phrased that too. So going back to some of those challenges as well, how has your life changed as an ultra-Orthodox rabbi, being this outspoken individual? I mean, I know that you don't pray, you don't daven at the synagogue where you work, you daven in an ultra-Orthodox setting. Even when you were here at Shaare Zedek, you went to another synagogue to daven, so you're more traditional way. Has that been difficult? Are you always included?
It's tricky because, right, some people find like it's super offensive, right? Like why are we not good enough? And I don't think it's about not being good enough. It's that everybody has different preferences, and we respect people's preferences. Like that's what this is about. And I don't want to have to choose, between my religious identity and the way in which I practice, and I don't think anyone else should either. I've been really fortunate at CBST that Rabbi Kleinbaum went to an Orthodox high school in New Jersey, Frisch, and has a really warm spot in her heart for Orthodox Judaism. As a lesbian, as a feminist, it wasn't a place that she felt like she could coexist at the time. But part of her commitment to inclusivity is she makes sure that there's food that has kosher supervision, the way in which you went out of your way to make sure. And so I think that's an act and a gesture of validating what people's needs are without the judgment of what those needs are. So it's difficult. I'm involved in a lot of different social justice organizations, and they're generous and invite me to come and speak, and they often don't put into the thought of like, well, what does this mean? Or we're going to be traveling on the Sabbath using, cars or planes or things, and I've gotten stuck places because I just didn't think to. And I was in Mexico with a social justice organization around immigration, and basically ate protein bars and drank beer for 4 days because that's what was available. That was kosher. You couldn't drink the water. You couldn't.
Oh my God, it sounds like living gluten-free. It's rough.
But it's happened. It happened one time. I was with the progressive organization, and I'm speaking about these because it's the same working mechanism when it comes to anyone who has a different lived experience. Whether that's being pulled over by police, if you're a person of color, like it's just a different experience. And I went into a part of Palestinian territory. I'm not using those words specifically, I'm just saying this is where Palestinians live. It's not to the exclusion of other ways of phrasing it. But it was some sort of Palestinian village a few years ago. And it was actually with an organization that had partnered with the Reform movement. And they had had a lot of issues with ultra-Orthodox people protesting what they were doing, and it was perceived as being too sympathetic to the plight of Palestinians. And when I come in to the Reform temple where people were gathering before they got on the bus, I was immediately accosted and yelled at and told to get out, and what am I doing here, and stop making trouble. And I said, buddy, I was invited. He said to me, who invited you? And I said, Rabbi Jill Jacobs, which was, I don't know what to say the name of the organization. Anyways, he said it's not possible. She doesn't invite people. I said, I have other things to do. Like, I didn't come here to get yelled at. And he said, where are you coming from? I told him who I was. And it turns out that Rabbi Kleinbaum actually married him and his husband. And he knew who I was, but didn't realize that was me. And that began.
He was expecting me, actually. He heard Mike Moskowitz was coming.
He's like, oh, the original.
Moskowitz is coming. He wanted the OG Moskowitz coming.
The original rabbi, yeah. He's like, I know an imposter when I see one. But that was just the beginning of a whole series of really unfortunate and dangerous circumstances. They drove this bus into a Palestinian village. And the person, one of the Palestinians comes onto the young Palestinian man, came onto the bus and said, if you're wearing a kippah, you just have to take it off because you can't, present as Jewish here. And I said, I can take off my kippah, right? But that's not. And he said, yeah, you can't get off the bus. And so I said to him, okay, so what I hear you telling me is that it's not safe for me to go off the bus, but it's safe for me to be left on the bus alone in this village. He paused for a second and said, you should be here when we get back. It was legitimately scary. Mohammed, the bus driver, went to daven mincha. I'm stuck on the bus. It's the summer, it's 1,000 degrees. I see an army jeep come by. I hop out, I wave them down, and I say, I think it's likely that there'll be less paperwork if you hang out with me here. But that's right. It was traumatic. Rabbi Kleinbaum yelled at all the people. But I mean, that's part of, I think, the space between inviting people and welcoming them, right? You can welcome people all the time. Come, it'll be fun. But if you're going to take the responsibility of inviting them, you have to make sure that it's actually a safe space for them.
Yeah, makes sense. You reference your time in Israel. Rabbi is an ardent Zionist, a strong supporter of Israel. Actually, if you want to hear something beautiful, is his speech he was invited to give at Jerusalem Pride last June. It's on YouTube. You can Google that up, and it's just a beautiful speech, both in Hebrew and English, to the community. 30,000 people were there to hear that and be affirmed by those words too. But you're also, progressively minded, do a lot of great social justice work. You talked about immigration. I know you've marched after George Floyd was murdered. You've done a lot of work in women's rights as well in this country. And in these past months, it's been a difficult time for those of us in that space where we don't feel necessarily supported, validated, and our concern and our love for Israel and are wary right now. How has that impacted you?
So I think we're all carrying, since October 7th, we're just all carrying a lot. We're all interconnected. Even had we found support from the entire world, it would be incapacitating. the current situation, people still being held hostage and so many people murdered and hurt. It's only exacerbated by the fact that the people that we marched with and for, right, have not only been silent, but have really been in opposition. And it's disappointing and also confusing. There are people for whom on October 6th, I never would have said that they were anti-Semitic, right? Were proactive, and we had relationships, and we invested a lot since like the Muslim ban in the previous administration in New York. Every Friday, we send congregants to the Islamic Center at NYU for years. And we did all sorts of really not superficial, but deep relationship building in interfaith spaces, particularly with the Muslim community. And there was just nothing. There was really nothing. But part of, I think, our faith-based tradition teaches us that we do the right thing because it's the right thing. And so we can be disappointed. You can't fiat attitude. You can't make somebody like you or stand up for you, but you can do it for other people and hope that they reciprocate. So I think there's something powerful in modeling the absence of the reciprocity, that we don't love people less because they're, in our minds, on the wrong side of this. I don't know what's going to happen and how, if it's possible to heal these relationships. It's super hurtful. It's really disappointing. But I think it needs to inspire us to have more faith that not only should we not regret the fact that we did the right thing, even though we're disappointed that they haven't fulfilled the expectation of doing the right thing in return. It, I think, also just reinforces that, unfortunately, we need each other much more as a Jewish community than we can ever really rely on the outside world. We're very grateful to have a lot of allies. This country in particular has been really, really, really supportive in really important ways. And at any moment, things can really shift really dramatically and really in the wrong way. So I think for me, I'm comforted by the faith that, particularly when it's difficult to believe you're on the right side of things because there's such opposition. But that's something that's part of our national, history. Like, Jews are a minority in the world. The average religious person is not accepting our narrative of
anything.
Of anything, right? So it's disappointing, but that's what it means to be a person of faith, is to say, I'm going to do what I think is right, even if it's unpopular.
I appreciate that, and I find it inspiring that you're so fervent in that as well. Even after you shared with me when we were together earlier, the idea that, like, the synagogue where you work, there have been organizations that refuse to partner with Beit Simchat Torah because you're a Zionist synagogue.
Yeah. And to be like, just to kind of articulate how absurd this is, if you think about the spectrum of being a Zionist synagogue, and I think they officially identify as like progressive Zionist. So in my mind, there's a line of BDS, right, of boycotting. We're like the smallest increment to the left of that, meaning we're as progressive Zionist, we're as progressive as you can be without boycotting Israel. I think 100% of our congregation was protesting this government on October 6th. Like, I was in Eretz Yisrael in Israel. We were going to the Saturday night protest. We were really vocal about being critical of the government and the policies. And the fact that we're like in that space, but we're just not willing to kind of cross over because we don't support it, that's enough to put us in the wrong camp in the eyes of many, particularly young, genderqueer and trans people. And it doesn't end well when there's internal division. And again, I'm not sure exactly how we heal from it, but we're not less responsible for those people either, just because they disagree with us.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Well, I've got to throw a lot of questions to you. Give a chance for anyone in our congregation today who wants to ask someone, ask as well. And online, I see there are, I can't see that far, a lot of people online with us, which is great. And if you want to type in the chat a question, I may be able to get to that too. So, yeah.
We want to hear your question.
Yes, thank you. Cantor is here to assist with that as well.
Hi, my name's Sarah. So this question is for both Rabbi Moskowitzes, the Haredi and Reform. So as someone who is more attracted to traditional, in even Orthodox Judaism, I've noticed as well as like a lot of my Orthodox queer friends that, it's whether they're converts or they were born Jewish, that there's a huge barrier in the Orthodox community. And in our last trans support group, we were talking about, we still desire community, but what would it mean as someone who has a from or Orthodox identity join a conservative or Reformed synagogue, and would we be welcome there and not be, because I've personally in the conservative world have kind of like had to put up with snide comments of like, oh, you don't need to fully keep Shabbos. I mean, you can still drive to shul. And I was just like, well, it's something that means a lot to me. And like, how, because I know it's not going to be overnight that the Orthodox world is going to open up, how can the Reform and the non-Orthodox world open their doors to Orthodox queer people who need a spiritual home in the interim, but still maintain their Orthodox from identity?
Good question. That's a good question, and I appreciate that. We can be open, and we can be accepting. We're not a traditional space, though, as far as how we daven. And I know some people come here with their own prayer book and appreciate the being in our community and still sort of daven on their own with the traditional prayer book as they hold, because they know that we're open and accepting in that way, and there's no judgment. That's cool in my mind. I can only speak for Temple Shir Shalom at that, because there are definitely Reform synagogues who may do it better. Like, we have sexed bathrooms. We don't have open bathrooms that are neutral in that way. And so I would like to be able to get there and make that. But I think by having bathrooms that are open to anyone, it sends a message. So right now, we're not sending the best message, I think, as a community, as a congregation. Again, there are a lot of Reform synagogues that don't do any of this well, because it's not where they are and they haven't pushed themselves to get there. So it's a priority for us. That's why Rabbi's here with us to teach us and to point these things out to us as well. That's why we've aligned ourselves with organizations like Keshet. The Religious Action Center of the Reform Movement does a great teaching for us as well, and we promote that. But I also like the idea of being post-denominational. So we are a member of the Reform Movement, of the Union of Reform Judaism. But part of me doesn't really care about that, because I don't care how you identify as long as you want to be a part of this community. So if you like what we're doing here, that's cool. And you can call yourself Orthodox, you can call yourself Reform, you can call yourself humanistic, it doesn't matter. Now, I would love to have more rabbis here, more cantors, and we could lead different. Rabbi Schwartz and me used to talk about this, like how we could have multiple services for Shabbat. If we had people who would support those and have an Orthodox minyan. It wouldn't be the one I would attend, no offense. So, I love cantor with a guitar and that feeling of our music. I know that's not what Orthodox Jews are looking for necessarily. So that being the case, that's who we are, and being authentic to that in a sense too, and being honest about it. But I still feel like, as I said the other night, like you're always welcome here, and we mix up our services too, and we do things differently.
There's a lot of good in a lot of places, and I think one of the things that you're fortunate in this city to have access to is, right, no shortage of synagogues, even in close, right? So part of it might be that, you feel nourished by some of the services on some days of the week in some places, and nourished by the other, offerings of education or community in other places. But there's a lot of good in a lot of places. Thank you. I see some hands over here.
Anita, we got a microphone. Cantor will. No, because we want to be on the recording too. We'll be patient. I can make up some stories right now. I'll tell you that Rabbi he doesn't bring stacks of his books to sell, but he has 4 books right now that are published. His textual activism. Let's see if I can get them all. Graceful Masculinity. Chaver Up, with the Chaver Up, which is 49 rabbis reflect on being a chaver with a contemporary Jewish lens or modern Jewish lens. I'm forgetting one.
This rabbi's in it.
Seasonal
Resistance.
Resistance. Oh, I got all four, yes. So, and I will say the book Chaver Up is, Rabbi went to 49 different rabbis asking us, what does it mean to be an ally? Seeing the work we had done, and then dropped an essay every day between Pesach and Shavuot in the 49 days of the counting of the Omer. So he taught me in asking me to write one of those essays, and it gave me an opportunity to share a story that I realized was so important in my life in identifying what it meant to be an ally. And so I've shared it with some of you. I'll just share it really quickly because I know Cantor's there now, Anita, but still I got more time. That two women whose wedding I had done a number of years ago, and I noticed that every time something happened, whether it was the legalization of gay marriage or something in law that was changed or something that happened, that I would post about it, and they would always affirm my post and re-share it and things like. And I realized at that point, and in talking to them, you can't say enough, I love you. You can't say enough that you are perfect the way you are. I can't say enough that this is right. And by being an ally, I realized I want to constantly be able to say that and share that as well. So, Anita?
Hi. I wanted to ask what your prayer, we have our own prayer book here we wrote. I'd like to ask what your prayer book looks like.
The one that I pray from is a very conventional Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox prayer book. It's like the Art Scroll version, basically, but just Hebrew. The prayer book that CBST has is also one that they wrote. It's powerful. It has blessings for queer rituals like transitions and changing names. It's filled with poems and contemporary thinkers and intentions. And it's also shifted the language a little bit around including more female historical figures, and also offering alternative meditations for different parts of the service. CVST, its major service during the week is Friday night. It's the same time year round. And then for Saturday morning, they have a rotation of 4 different types of services, depending on the week. Because it's not actually affiliated with any of the movements. We have a robust clergy team. I take care of the Orthodox and the ultra-Orthodox, but we have folks from all the different denominations, and we're now in the process of searching for a new rabbi, because the senior rabbi is retiring, and folks from all of the different denominations are applying. So it's an interesting kind of gathering of people that what brings them together. About 80% of the membership is queer identified. And 20% are allies and parents of and children of. We have a really extensive Hebrew school, which nobody could have imagined when it started, that there was going to be a queer Hebrew school, because nobody was having children yet in queer spaces. And it's just an amazing space. There's a lot more to talk about the culture there, particularly around the Sabbath. During the AIDS epidemic, 40% of the congregation died from AIDS. There wasn't a week where there wasn't somebody sitting Shiva, and people weren't in mourning. But Rabbi Kleinbaum, when she came on, she was very deliberate that Shabbos, the Sabbath, is going to be like a protected space for joy. And one of the big themes of the congregation is really joy as spiritual practice, as political resistance, that if you can still smile and you can still be happy, then you can still fight, and you can still be an agent of change. And hopelessness and despair are things that are really not welcomed in that space, as difficult as it is. And Rabbi Kleinbaum was a rabbi during the AIDS epidemic and during Rabin's assassination and during the previous administration, which for progressive places was really traumatic, particularly when it came to deep fears of the removal of protections and pandemic. And since October 7th, and this time is perhaps of the most difficult times. It's a really, really difficult time to be alive, and it's a difficult time to feel human, because it's all too much. It's all way too much. But particularly on the Sabbath, it was a time to come together, to restore that sense of community, the sense of self, and to be able to really prepare for the brokenness of the weekday.
Rabbi Kleinbaum is a very powerful, important rabbi. I mean, just a visionary and a revolutionary. I have a few follow-up thoughts and questions to that too, because one, what you just said, I didn't realize that and know that, and I find it so affirming. We were talking about the past two Shabbatot, that because we're feeling such weight and sense of loss because of what's happening in Israel in these past 3.5 months. And especially this first month, those first Shabbatot, were just a time to be together and just to cry but I feel like we found joy on some level. And Mia Schramm, one of the hostages who was released, she was the one who she had tattooed on her arm that we will dance again, right? And the idea that we still have Shabbat and we're still here together doesn't minimize the pain that's happening in our world, but we have to use that joy to create that hope that you've talked about as well. And I think it's such a value that I hold on to in my Judaism. Is that prayer book you mentioned, is it available to purchase through their website?
CBST has its own prayer book, and they can ship all over. It's a powerful contribution to Jewish literature, like itself, as an offering. There's also a history book of the history of CBST. It's an incredible story. It started really with gay men, many who were part of an Orthodox community and family, but everybody was closeted, like you really couldn't be out. And so people suffered the whole week looking forward to be able to come into the Sabbath and like be out. And there's all sorts of stories about what happened with the first Shabbat. I think there are hundreds of people who've claimed to be there as one of the 10 people, because it was such a...
We understand that at Shir Shalom, so we totally...
But no, it's a powerful, it's really a powerful statement of resiliency.
That's cool. Next question.
I had one from Susan. Can we do Susan first here?
Sure.
And then come back since I'm here?
Okay, it's a short question, really. A bathroom question. You mentioned it a little bit, but now that we're expanding and making changes, are you thinking about having a gender-neutral bathroom?
Yeah, our new bathrooms are, but they're also in the school wing in a sense as well, and in classrooms, but there's no sex on those bathrooms, no gender on the bathrooms, say. I'd like to be able to change these. And of course, any idea takes, kesef, right? It takes dollars, so I'd just be able to fund that. But I would like to see us move in that direction. And you should know, any of these decisions, and it's the kind of thing where I think most would support it, but there'd be people at Temple who'd be like, why are we doing that? Why are we spending our money doing that? That's not necessary, right? So we have to always be able to do the right thing to feel about that too. So Gary Cooper in the back.
Gary Cooper. Okay, well, that's all right. I'm running.
Making Cantor get her workout. It's really...
This is my steps today.
That's right.
Yeah. I feel like...
Let's hear it for Cantor for helping
Phil
out. Donahue. Right? That's right.
I never met a microphone I didn't like, so, but listening to the talk tonight, I've always been accepting of my friends who are gay, the children of the gay children of my friends, my clients who are gay, my ex-wife who is gay. But it sounds like in tonight's discussion, acceptance isn't enough. The word ally has come out, and should I be doing more than acceptance? How should I be an ally rather than just an accepting person?
First, it's great to be accepting, and we all need to do more. This world is super messed up, and it's upon all of us to fix it. I think people should be celebrated. There's acceptance. Like, it's okay. Like, I'm okay with it, right? I accept this. I've, resigned myself to accepting something. And there's something else about curiosity of like, how does this contribute to you being awesome? Like, you're an amazing person, right? I want to celebrate the totality of who you are. And I think that is a better ask, right? To celebrate life, to elevate life, to protect it, and to really encourage others to do the same. It's a very strange thing as somebody who's straight, and I don't celebrate my straightness. It's not a thing for me. Straight power, I think, is like not something that like, makes a lot of sense. I have no straight pride. Like that's not something. There's no. I don't have a flag. Is there? I don't think there's a straight flag.
I don't think so.
I feel like everybody needs a flag. Just like in life, I just.
The one thing that I would add to that is what you said yesterday afternoon or morning, whatever it was that using the pronouns on our internet services or in our correspondence.
Yeah.
Would you speak to that just
Yeah, I'm
briefly?
happy to
Because I
speak
think
to
that
it.
answers Gary's question also.
Sure. Yeah, and just to finish, that's so much of the necessity to elevate the queer and the genderqueer experience is because it's been so oppressed. And even now in this country, there's a lot of anti-trans legislation. So part of it is elevating it because historically it's been suppressed. And that's why, like, for people who've always had access to marriage equality, we don't need to celebrate it because it was always the default. So I think it's also the sensitivity that accepting something in the context of having to fight to just exist requires an additional kind of appreciation of what that means to exist in that space that historically hasn't been accepted. But when I introduce myself, you know, he, him. And I think it's an important way of kind of projecting to the world that these are values that are important to us. And of all the identities that I carry as a father and a son and a brother, someone who's from the South, you know, a rabbi, he, him is not in the top 100 of my essential identities. I don't think about my masculinity, I don't sense it. And I think so much of the work of advancing equality is to say that it's not important if you're a man or a woman in terms of what you're saying. We should listen to it. And I think maybe I shared a story. I was doing a book talk with a man of trans experience, and it was a Zoom talk. So we're schmoozing beforehand. He sees on the Zoom screen that by my name it says Rabbi Mike Moskowitzes, he, him. And he said to me, I should probably put my pronouns next to my name. But I've had actually a lot of painful and expensive surgeries, so I shouldn't have to tell you what my pronouns are, right? That's why I present as I do, so that you see that I'm a man without having. And so whenever and this goes back to the earlier conversation about allyship and the Jewish framing, if something is a response or a reaction, we're treating the element of the symptoms, there are going to be unintended consequences, there's going to be side effects. And one of the unintended consequences of sharing one's pronouns is that there's now, you know, some peer pressure to do the same. And what happens if somebody's real pronouns are they, them, and they don't necessarily want to share that, right? So it's forcing people to share things that maybe they don't want to, and it's hyper elevating like the idea of gender as like the thing to know about the person is their gender. But I think at this moment, part of the awkwardness of it is acknowledging that the world is still broken, that we all take medicine and we deal with the side effects when it's worse not to take the medicine. And I think not elevating the need and the role of pronouns now is net negative by not doing it. But I think it's also important that's not the goal. The goal of the world isn't that everybody has to share their pronouns. It's that it shouldn't make a difference what your pronouns are. We care about you, we love you, we see you, we need you. And so we shouldn't have to respond to the brokenness in that way.
Thank you.
Ken?
Wait.
Wait.
We want to hear
Thank you, Alyssa. Rein him in.
There's definitely been a paradigm shift in the Reform community, and now you can see it in the conservative community, the acceptance of what we're talking about. Have you seen any type of positive paradigm shift in the Orthodox community? I'm sure when you began, you had many colleagues coming up and saying, "Are you Meshuggah?
Yeah.
Go away."
Except it wasn't a question, it was a statement.
It was a
You
statement.
are Meshuggah. Yeah, so the answer is yes. It's the best it's ever been. There's still a lot of work to be done. I think the most significant paradigm shift is no longer expecting and pressuring queer men to marry straight women, which was been the default for forever. And when the world was a less safe place for people to be out, people suffered in silence, but now there are choices. Young people staying in Orthodox spaces and being out as queer is also changing things dramatically, and I think there's no greater contribution to that kind of systemic change than young people refusing to choose and staying put. And I think also weddings and rituals. We just celebrated, my wife's also an Orthodox rabbi. She teaches at Maharat, and she officiated the Pidyon Ben, the redeeming of the firstborn son of a couple that we're very close with. It's two women. This is now their second child. Each one carried kind of the egg of the other. And so even though they're two sons, this is still the firstborn of this birth, which you can really kind of only have when you have two people with a uterus, which is like itself very interesting to have two Pidyon Bens. Or I think maybe the first one was a C-section, so there wasn't a Pidyon Ben, but it's the second son having a Pidyon Ben. It's fascinating. But it provides an opportunity for a community to see two people who love each other, people who are like exceptional human beings, who happen to be queer, and they're Orthodox, and they love each other, and they're married to each other. I was at the bris of the first one. I think I was in Israel, maybe I had COVID. I didn't show up to the second. I think I had COVID, so I couldn't come. But I've done a whole bunch of queer weddings, and I think I shared earlier that one wedding that I did of two Orthodox women, one was kind of a centrist Orthodox family, the other was a right-wing Orthodox family. There was a lot of premarital counseling for the parents and for the grandparents. The one set of grandparents wanted to show up to the wedding in order to walk out in protest by the chuppah, which is itself a very yeshivish thing to show up in order to leave. And so the father of one of the brides, like there was a boy band, like it had all the trappings of, like, if you've ever been to like a yeshivish Orthodox wedding, it's got a very specific feel and some smells, but this was all of that. And I spoke to the father of the one that was more yeshivish, and they were like taking pictures before the wedding. And I said, like, how's it going? Because we had had a lot of conversations. And he said, I'm trying to get there, right? It was clear to him he was going to show up because he wasn't not going to show up. But it was also clear that his heart wasn't in it. Like, part of this was actually, I think, a bit of a mourning ritual, that like his vision was not going to become fulfilled of having a son-in-law from this, from his daughter. And so there's the chuppah, I speak, all the things, we break the glass. They have the first dance, and it's the way in which these weddings work. There's a partition, there's very yeshivish music, people in circles depending on the gender, and it's all very kind of consistent to every Orthodox wedding I've ever been to. And then the flags come out, and the rainbow ribbons come out, and all the gay stuff comes out, as it were. And it's a different vibe, and it's a different party, and people are dancing louder and faster, and the music is shifting. And I look over to the father who is struggling, and he says to me, I got there, right? And for some people, it's really just a process of seeing the love and seeing the joy and seeing the community support. And so I think this is the last generation where people will be going to their first wedding of queer folks as adults. I think this is really like the Reform movement and the conservative movement. They all had, a process to get there. It's just Orthodoxy's turn. And just like for other religions, they don't care about any other verse. And for different movements that put a different emphasis on the verse. Within Orthodoxy also, it's not about the verse.
Well, speaking of the verse, I'm thinking of Purim and what Esther is told, that maybe she's here for the right time, for the right purpose. And I sort of feel like maybe you're in this place, for the right time and the right purpose in the Orthodox world, with your voice, with your articulateness, able to communicate what is needed universally. And I see the progress happening because you're such a great teacher. And I think it's such a blessing that we've been able to learn with you tonight and hear from you and benefit from that. I know it's helped me these past years we've been talking, but and reading your books as well. But just hearing you so naturally express and share, and it's truly a blessing. And so, on behalf of Shir Shalom and our entire community, I can't thank you enough for that. So, really,
Thank you very much. Y'all are very lucky to have your own Rabbi Mike Moskowitzes here locally, but really it's there was a time where the more rabbis I met, the less I wanted to be one. But there are rabbis here who really inspire me, and Sometimes people don't appreciate it because this is maybe the only Rabbi Mike Moskowitz you've ever had, but just know how fortunate and lucky you are.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I will say this is, hopefully the first of, not just these kind of programs, but time with my friend Rabbi Moskowitz, because he really is such a gifted individual, but we have fun together too. And it's really a joy to spend the time and to learn with you. So he's not running out the door. We have some, refreshments. I know it's not Shabbat, so it's on Oneg, but it's, imagine that kind of food out there and stuff to enjoy, and you can meet Rabbi for a few.
But first, it is Erev Yom Huledet for Rabbi Mike Moskowitz. So he said he wouldn't mind if we all sang, Happy birthday to you.
I've been outed.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Rabbi. Happy birthday.
It's a long name.
To, and many more.
Thank you, Cancer. Thank you. I'm blessed to celebrate it with you all and sharing that. So thanks. Thank you, everyone, for being a part of tonight. Appreciate it. Thank you to everyone online as well. And your comments were beautiful. And this will stay online for anyone who wants to share with others, too.
So thank you for not dashing out on Kol HaYisha.